Bang ding ding, trademark. He come out 6'7" tall. Bang ding ding, one is star. Bang dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding. It is a perfect day.
Woke up to the sound of the garbage truck again. Upstairs neighbor's toilets leaking on my head. And cars broke down, I missed the bus, there runs a 10. I had a feeling this was a day to stay in bed. I finally left my pad right on the jumbo's cloud roof. A police officer pulled out his gun and said, I said, sir, you got the wrong guy. I guess it's just the perfect day. It's just the perfect day. Na, 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 na,
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Eggs. Today's special guest is Tony Guarnaccia. Tony is an educator, coach, entrepreneur, and widely recognized authority on digital marketing, having driven serious results for thousands of businesses from startups to the Fortune 500. Tony's personal mission to democratize marketing is fueled by a desire to keep small business owners profitable by sharing the insights he's discovered in working alongside some of the biggest brands across hundreds of niches. He believes that by growing small business, together we can impact not only our local communities, but also the world by supporting local nonprofits, charities, ministries, and causes that drive positive change. Here to talk about the skills you should train for before you hire, simple ways to improve your business cash flow, crisis management, and even growth in our new post-COVID normal, please join me in welcoming our guest, Tony Guarnaccia. Hey, Tony, how are you, man?
Great. Thanks so much for having me here today.
Of course. Thrilled to have you. So let's talk a little bit about just sort of who you are, where you come from, and let's get a little background on what you do.
Absolutely. So I grew up in small business. My parents had a small Italian bakery, which you can probably tell from the last name. They were fantastic bakers, but unfortunately, they didn't know what they didn't know about running a business. And so, like so many businesses, unfortunately, 70% fail within 10 years. We became one of those statistics. So at the age of 12, my parents, myself, lost everything, including the car and the home, and had to move into my oldest sister's basement. And so I had to get used to kind of a very difficult environment, transitioning the school I went to, and, I was just getting into high school, and it was a real challenge. Years later, I ended up working, as I look back and examining myself, to really redeem the past. So I went to college and got a degree in business, in entrepreneurship specifically. Went after school and started a second bakery with my parents, this time an online bakery, where we could take a cake, put a photo on it, and mail it anywhere across the country. And because of that, the technology and the innovation, we won the best new product at the New York Incentive Show. And from that, we ended up landing celebrity clients like Jennifer Lopez, Jay-Z, mailing cakes, for IBM, Sun Microsystems, Oracle, huge companies like that. But then sadly, I discovered I don't know everything I needed to know either. So this first business, even though we had great SEO, we were on the top for birthday cake and corporate gifts, you name it. That business failed. And I found myself homeless yet again, moving into my second sister's basement. But this time, my own personal situation was much, much worse because I was newly married and I had a baby on the way. So it was really a challenge, to say nonetheless. So I said to myself, clearly, I don't know what I'm doing. And then I said to myself, well, who does know what they're doing? And that is really what started me on a 10-year journey to work with the best companies in the world. Google, ADP, Ford Motor Company, BMW, General Motors, really the top brands in the world. And then 10 years ago, or 8 years ago, I went back to my roots. I wanted to teach entrepreneurs the things I learned that I was missing so that they could fill in the gaps in the areas they don't know that they don't know, and hopefully make a difference in their life and not let them become one of those statistics of business failure.
So
yeah, no, I love that. That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Your vision statement on your website, it says that your goal is to impact the growth of 1 million businesses by 2026.
Correct.
By showing how they can leverage growth compounding and
Yes.
6 growth factors and stuff like that.
Correct.
How does that work? Can you break that down for us? I mean, growth compounding and growth factors in particular.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm happy to share how we can accomplish what I would call the BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal, 1 million business. I'll share about that. But before I get into that, I can talk about growth compounding. So growth compounding is really one of the secrets I discovered the best companies do. And so really what that is doing multiple things concurrently that together drive exponential growth. So if you're like most businesses, your growth is very incremental. And so say you're a great business, you're growing at 10% because the average business grows at 5%. If you're growth compounding across 6 factors, each of those compound against each other. So you actually, if you do just 5 factors concurrently, you get 61% growth. So that gives you a lot less risk because you're diversified across multiple factors. And also when you do them all simultaneously, you get a compounding effect of exponential growth that's mathematical certainty. So that's the power of it. And really what those 6 factors are, and I can get into detail, but essentially it's your markets, your products and services, your value proposition, which ties everything together, the number of buyers you attract, the size of those buyers in terms of lifetime value, and then finally the loyalty of those buyers, which is how often they come back to buy from you and how often they generate referrals.
Okay. How did you go about figuring this out? Is this something you learned from someone else, or is it something you kind of figured out on your own?
Yeah, well, like anything, there's always influences. I would say one of my greatest influences would be Jay Abraham. He was definitely one of the big influences in this, but I found that his model is missing certain things. So I tried to improve upon what I saw there. But then also, a lot of the ways he would describe, and I love Jay Abraham, but there was never any specificity. So what I wanted to create was a system where you can model any business and understand their business model very quickly in one page. And so that you could also kind of study what your competitors are doing, benchmark yourself, and really look at outside of your industry. So what I noticed, because I've been blessed to work with like 10,000 small businesses over the years, and a lot of times people say, hey, Tony, that's a brilliant idea. And really all I'm doing is looking at another industry. So for instance, if I'm a chiropractor and my appointment ratio is horrible, why not look at a car dealership who has a great appointment ratio? They have it down to a science. So a lot of the innovations you can get by looking at other industries. And my model is a great way to do that because you can literally document what they're doing and then expand upon that within your own business.
Yeah, I actually read a blog post of yours that talked about the difference between Xerox marketing and innovating. And the innovators were, like Southwest Airlines would look at NASCAR and how to turn their planes around faster. And not necessarily in the industry, they're looking at other, Ford, for example, you brought up or mentioned that they looked at meat manufacturing for the assembly lines. Correct. So it's interesting to look outside of the, use other business models in your business, even though it might not necessarily apply.
Well, yeah, it's such an interesting idea too. I mean, the novelty of that idea. I mean, it's funny because I've been sort of chasing around entrepreneurial circles for a long time. And honestly, I don't think I've ever really heard it talked about that way. Typically you would look at, if you're in e-commerce, for example, you might look at how Amazon does it, right? They're the best in the business, but this concept of sort of looking across species, I guess, and seeing how other people are doing it is, it sounds very cool. I love that.
And literally the only reason I came across that is because I've worked across so many industries and I'm very I won't say cultural, but I can't think of a better word at the moment, but everyone tells you to niche down and be specific. My MO has been exactly the opposite. I'm very broad with a lot of experience across a lot of areas that I can kind of almost like a Swiss Army knife, apply it as necessary. And I think that's where the innovation comes from. So if you look at where the innovation is coming from today, look at a company like Tesla, totally reworking the way automotive work and why they're taking a software first approach. If you look at Uber, Airbnb, all this innovation, they're basically taking from other industries and applying it in a new way. Because, I've done a lot in the limousine industry, and, there was never innovation. All of a sudden, someone from left field comes in and they have tremendous value, and, they're taking off like wildfire. Well, why? Because they're simply innovating and really leveraging things that have been around forever, but not in that particular vertical.
Interesting.
Yeah, I love that. I wanted to ask you just a little bit about, so, now looking back, you had mentioned in your sort of intro there at the top that this idea of sort of your road of redemption, so to speak, so that you got into this business to sort of avenge the experience of your family and basically pay it forward to other small businesses, in terms of, trying to be able to become profitable on their own and overcome some of the problems that maybe your family missed.
Yeah.
And so I wondered if you talk a little bit about that, just in terms or like in the frame of sort of discovering or uncovering our motivation. It's funny because the way that you described it was in this road for, this road of redemption. You were trying to, right a wrong. But I think too, it could almost be seen almost as revenge. Like I did this because, and the reason I bring up the difference, or that I would like to discuss the difference, is because it seems like, in terms of setting our motivation in the right spot, it seems like, you did it from this place of this wholesome thing, but it's just a little twist of vernacular to make it a revenge story instead. But then once you've sort of sought revenge, where to from there, right? And so I wonder if you could talk about being sort of mission driven, and how you've been able to leverage that in your own success, and how other small businesses may be able to sort of find that in their own lives.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. At the end of the day, I think if I had to use one word to describe kind of all this, it would be resiliency. The one thing I have is resiliency. And yeah, there's different motivations, obviously proving others wrong, starting with myself, proving myself that I can do something. So I always try to go against the grain of what I have. Like if I have a fear, I tend to go in that direction. I was on a podcast recently, and it was an interesting question. His question was like, okay, why or why not? And I'm definitely more of a why not type of guy, because I want to be bold. Like I don't want to be holding back, because I think people have a problem with failure, but the best companies incorporate failure into their process. And so, if you look at Google, how many products of theirs fail? So it's definitely part of the culture. And even when I started my agency, I have now a consulting and training company I focus on now, but I have an agency as well. And in the agency, literally in our culture deck, I talk about failure, like embrace failure, because if you don't, you get into paralysis. And so I think all of those kind of dynamics come into play. But at the end of the day, my story is a story of resilience, because I never give up. Even when it's dark and there doesn't seem to be a light at the end of the tunnel, I'm still charging forward. And I really get that from my mother. I have a book coming out called Small Steps to Grow Profits. And the name actually comes from my mother, The Small Steps, which it's also, kind of a parable of what a business should be doing. But if you look at the original story, it comes from my mother, who also survived an epidemic. So of course, now we're dealing with, COVID and all that. Back in the late 1930s, there was a polio epidemic. And so sadly, my mother contracted that at just 9 months old. And she was literally not able to walk from 9 months to 14 years old.
Oh, wow.
And she was quarantined all by herself, couldn't associate with family. A lot of the things we're going through today. And even back then, they had iron lungs, which are known as ventilators today. So it's a very dark period. It was affecting mostly children. So it was a very difficult time. And so I asked my mother, I said, how did you survive this? Like, how did you possibly do that? Because I can't even wrap my head around it. Because a lot of the problems I have with business failure or anything else, that's nothing compared to being quarantined for, years, 14 years, and, not able to walk. And so she said, I break things down. I break it down into, essentially small steps. And that's where the name came from. Because when she was in the hospital, what'd they do? Well, they teach you how to do pottery so you could get some function and nervous, build up your muscles and your nervous system. Then they have you, swimming. Eventually they have you taking the small steps. So at the end of her journey, she was actually able to wear high heels. And even today, it's not easy for her, but she's still able to walk. A lot of times people her age, she's 85, aren't able to walk. Even with having polio in the past, she's able to walk. So that's one of the things I talk about in my book, is how to take small steps so you can become more resilient both your life and in your business.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And also a a key characteristic that keeps coming up in conversations recently here on this show and others is this idea of resiliency, and just how critical it is right now in a time like dealing with COVID and working through this. And I think some people sort of look at resiliency as this ability to take a hit or work themselves to the ground or whatever and keep showing up every day. But I think so much of it really has to do with your ability to bounce back from things. Accept that failure is a hurdle that you're going to hit along the way, but your ability to sort of stay the course or keep fighting even though that's happened, I think is critical for resilience. So that's a great story about your mother and everything else. So it's awesome.
I actually, like the celebrating failure thing, though, I don't necessarily agree with that, just because if you go into that with that in mind, like I've heard stories of like having failure parties, like, hey, we screwed up, let's have a cake and a DJ, like that just doesn't seem, you know what I mean? But like and I've had friends tell me fail faster, like why take 6 years to get out of a problem that, like you could have just filed for bankruptcy and moved on. I admit, you have to be able to accept failure and move on, but I don't necessarily think that you should have to embrace it and have it as a game plan. I don't know if that's taken out of context or not, but
I wouldn't say celebrate it, but I think accepting failure. So for instance, like when I hire an employee, I tell them it's okay to make a mistake, because what I don't want is paralysis. Sure. And so if they're not willing to kind of step out and actually even part of one of our core values is to be bold, step out into the deep end essentially. So if you're not willing to take a risk and you're too scared, then you're actually constricting yourself. But the point though is when you do fail, you learn from it. Yeah. So the way I think about it, it's okay to fail once, but don't fail a second time.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Don't make failure a sport, but at the same time, learn from it. Another theme that I always talk to, with entrepreneurs and things is this idea of pattern recognition. Yeah. And it's, and that's, I think in large part, one of the things we can take away from failure is this idea of recognizing patterns. What is it that led to that failure? Now, if we see it again, we know where this goes. And so, and back to our idea of resiliency also, I think, having this ability to recognize patterns, be able to, predict what's coming down the pipe will allow you to be a little bit more resilient, or at least allow you to deflect that shot a little better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at the end of the day, obviously calamities can happen, but for the most part, you have to take ownership for where you are today, because we're all really a result of the decisions we've made. For the most part, like I said, there can be outside forces, of course, that are, outside your control. But as much as possible, we want to make sure we're prioritizing our time, money, and efforts in business, because really how we manage those things are going to dictate where we go. And so if you make a mistake, just be aware of that, but then you have to pivot and change and make sure you're not repeating those.
Yeah, I think analyzing the failure is important too. Like sitting back and thinking about, what did I do wrong? What happened here? What could I have done different to not get in that position? Right. In your experience with Image Cake, are there any key points or factors that stand out in your memory of things that you might have done differently that would have kept it afloat? Or?
Absolutely. So the book I have is called Small Steps. We talked about the small steps. The second part of it is to grow profits. I think businesses don't put enough thought into profits. Sometimes even from a mindset perspective, people think profiting is bad. And so it's very important, because the thing I didn't build enough profit. The reason Image Cake failed is because they were a fairly expensive cake, but we were very dependent on shipping, because we were using a proprietary system with a pin structure and then dry ice to mail it across the country. So you could literally throw this cake, UPS could throw it, or FedEx, nothing would happen to it. It was impervious to anything. The problem is the cost of shipping went up and up and up, and we just had no profit left. So there really wasn't any way to sustain the business. And that's the same problem I find today with a lot of businesses. They don't really take into account their profit first. There's a great book by Michael Michalowicz that talks about profit first. The best business book you could probably read as a start, because it really teaches that idea. But businesses, I believe, fail today a lot of times because A, the profitability, and B, the cash flow. So looking at those two things, especially in situations like we have today, and it's a really simple question. How much money do I have, and when is it coming? in. Keeping account of those two things are something I hadn't even heard of, because in college, they teach you really how to work for a corporation. They don't really teach you, even though I was an entrepreneurship major, they didn't really hit on the importance of, managing your cash and the cash flow and all those from a small business perspective.
Well, yeah, it makes sense. I keep bringing it up that now in this sort of post-COVID world, the businesses you see that aren't going to be able to weather the storm are the ones that manage their money like we Americans do, right? That are over leveraged on debt or who don't have any savings, all that kind of stuff. Those will be the people, right? And so those are the ones who didn't, keep an eye on their profits early on, weren't collecting enough and setting enough aside, whatever. I mean, it's lack of preparation, and part of that is cultural. We have these business models run by entrepreneurs where people are going, reinvesting every dollar, this idea that we just keep reinvesting and reinvesting and reinvesting. And we don't put a ton of emphasis or a ton of stock into keeping this stockpile of cash laying around just in case.
Right.
Now, this, thing with COVID is, maybe more difficult than we probably could have anticipated for.
Yes.
And outside of the Apples and the Googles of the world with their just, money presses in the back office, they, not a lot of businesses could have prepared for something like this. No. But nonetheless, I think you make a really great point with this idea of, basically getting back to fundamental, stuff. This idea of cash flow and profit. And, and it's honestly, it's one of the more interesting and aha moments I've had during this crisis as we've been interviewing a lot of business leaders and that type of people, is how much, even though the whole world has changed and been flipped on its ear, how much the foundational stuff is still kind of where it's at. Yeah. Like, had we been foundationally good about our cash flow, had we been foundationally good about saving, had we been foundationally good about all these other aspects of business, we may be more poised to weather this storm than we are. And so I think Absolutely. That's a critical learning.
But even with that, though, there's things you can do. So, for instance, the first thing I did was I call up I looked at my credit card statements. And as you have an agency, I think, right? Mm-hmm. So how much stuff do we buy that we don't really need? So first thing I did was red line all this software, and say, okay, I don't need that. What vendors am I using that I could probably cut back on or reduce? Is my team being, maximized? All those kinds of things. And then also from a cash flow perspective, calling up clients and say, hey, I got to make sure I get paid on time. Going through receivables. I mean, there's still things we can do even now. I'm sure that listeners out there, there's still things, there's always a little bit of money. And like me, I'm pretty good at this. Like I squeeze money in January, or December at the end of the year. But even me, I went back and I was like, okay, I can squeeze a little bit more, even though, because I had incentive to, because it was so crazy. But for instance, my hosting company, I called them and said, hey, do you have any specials due to COVID? Oh yeah, we're actually discounting at 50% for the next 2 months. Found money. So just even going back to that, I mean, there's always opportunities.
Yeah, no, that's a great observation. Actually, I wish I could remember which company it was. There's some service, one of these software businesses that I was checking out of the other day, and I was like, okay, I'm done using it, right? And so I go to quit, and then they serve me up a pop-up window that says, oh, well, it's 75% off if you stay for 3 more months, Yeah. And it was that same thing. It was just because I had been pushed to quitting, but I ended up not quitting. I just re-upped for 3 more months, but at a 75% break. Yeah. And so, like you said, I love that perspective, the found money thing.
Yeah.
So as we sort of, maybe talk a little bit more about your process and all these things, I wondered, you have this unique opportunity of working with a lot of Fortune 500 companies, a lot of small businesses, people like that. And so you've seen a lot of things, been a lot of places. I wonder if you could just back to this idea of pattern recognition, talk a little bit about how to recognize success. So if I run a business and I'm trying to, model my business after somebody, again, maybe doing this comparison and examining other industries and stuff, are there markers for businesses that are doing it right? I feel like a lot of times we would look at somebody like an Apple or somebody who seems to be flush with money. And the assumption would be, oh, well, they must be doing it right? I mean, obviously they've figured it out. Meanwhile, if you dig into their stocks or whatever, you find out that they're actually experiencing a lot of losses or whatever, So are there, some sort of telltale indicators or things that you look for when trying to model after another business?
Sure. Yeah. So I would start actually, as much as we say innovation comes outside of your niche, I would start with in your niche and in your market and define the market leaders. And so usually you can identify the market leaders because you already know they're usually pretty self-evident. But a lot of times they have a lot of visibility in their marketplace. They have more employees than you. They're ahead of you. They have better market share. At the end of the day, they have better market share. And then in terms of examining them, I wouldn't examine where they are today. I would examine where they were back when they were your size. So say you're $1 million and you want to, and the market leader is 10 million. Don't look at their website now. Look at the website, how it looked like 10 years ago when they were at 1 million. How do you do that? Well, I love archive.org. I go to archive.org, look at the old version of the website and see what they look like. Even Amazon, you can kind of track Amazon's trajectory. They started with books. What were they doing there? What was their messaging? So virtually any company that's a leader, you can go back in time and look and see what they were doing at that point in time. And then there's so much you can do from SEO perspective, looking at keyword research, competitive intelligence. All those are great markers for success.
Yeah, I like that. Another mission that you kind of focused on is democratizing marketing.
Yes.
Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So it really starts with what I call the marketing revolution. So, 40, 50 years ago, marketing was much easier. You get an ad, you throw it in the newspaper, your little community reads it or the yellow pages, and boom, you got business. Then things got a little bit more complicated. You had broadcast media like radio and TV. Then lo and behold, things get even more fragmented. You have the internet. So, it was manageable. You had Yahoo was a directory, but then got even more crazy. You had to have search engines. So you had Alta Vista and Lycos. And then finally got more sophisticated. So Google came around. Then there was another evolution. The next stage was where you had social media, right? So now everyone's creating content. So there's even more and more out there to the point where there's just instantaneous access with the mobile phone where you can post anything, anytime you want. And now you're finding even more change with you're really competing for attention, not with your competitors anymore, but you're competing with Amazon and Netflix and YouTube and the best in class for content. So what does that mean? Well, really, it's caused three fundamental issues. And I've seen these issues at all levels. Literally sitting in a room with 100 CMOs from the top companies in the world, like Hasbro and Microsoft, companies like that, all the way down to the mom and pop small businesses. And the three problems are, number one, fragmentation. There used to be a couple channels, meaning newspaper, radio, etc. Now there's gazillions, right? Where do you show up? That's hurdle number one. Hurdle number two, okay, we got that down. How do we actually stand out? Because there's so much clutter. Even if you get there, how do you break through so people actually notice who you are? And then hurdle number three, even if you get past the other two, one of the killers is technology. How do you manage the technology? And so my mission is to help democratize marketing by helping educate people on how those three things work and what you can do about it.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think too, that maybe this dovetails nicely into another thing that you spend a lot of time talking about, which is this idea of turning your adversity into opportunity.
Yeah.
And I think that, messaging like that is particularly, apropos to what's going on in society and everything. And, looking at this, especially with COVID and all this stuff, there are few foes more adverse. And so I wonder if you talk a little bit about just sort of it sounds like the mindset shift, at looking at adversity and turning it into opportunity, and then how that sort of plays into this democratization of marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to my mother's story where she taught me about small steps, what I found is there's really three kind of areas that come into play. What step to take, how to take those steps, and finally taking those steps, taking the action. So most people, most small businesses, almost all the ones I talk about or talk with, they start with step number 2, which is how to do it. How do I do SEO? How do I do podcasting? How do I do anything, right? Advertising. Without first taking into context the what. What do I want to accomplish and why? The what and the why are so important, especially when it comes to resiliency. If you don't have a big enough purpose or a big enough why, you're not going to be able to sustain yourself through the downs because there's always going to be an easier option. So the why is critical, but from a marketing and planning perspective and strategy perspective, the what is equally important because, I see this all the time, and I've done it too. How many of us have wasted money in advertising or hired the wrong people? Or right? I've done it many times, sadly, lost hundreds of thousands of dollars with bad decisions. And so if I would have taken into account more of the what, that would have alleviated a lot of those problems. And that's really having a strategy and a plan.
I've recently listened to a book called Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why.
Oh yeah, great book.
But I haven't thought about the what portion of it, and I liked what you just said there because it does apply. Well, kind of off topic, I noticed a post on your website, and I love your tab icon on your website, by the way, the silhouette of your head. That's brilliant. You talked about in this article about speed reading and how it helped you give you an advantage.
Yes.
Did you learn that from Jim Quick, or is that something that
no, I've met Jim Quick. I met Jim Quick before and know him, but not that well, but I know him. But no, I learned it on my own. Like literally I took a course online. I can't remember what it was because this was like 10 years ago. But I also used the Kindle app. So the Kindle's got a great app where within Kindle, it'll literally have the words stream by. So it forces you to speed read. So between the course and that really helped me. And last year, I forget how many I read, but I think I read something like 60 books. And so it gives me a huge advantage because I'm able to kind of just digest so much more information. I also listen to things like I listened to a bunch of your podcasts before this.
Oh,
and I'm listening at 2x. And I drive my wife nuts and my kids because they're like, everything sounds like a chipmunk. But that's the way my brain thinks. I like to consume information very quickly. And I don't normally do it if it's something new. So if I'm learning a totally new topic, I'll slow it down a little bit. But if it's something that I'm already, in that area, like a marketing book, I will fly through that, maybe even 3x speed because I'm crazy like that. But
a lot of the content is going to be repeats of stuff you've heard because lots of people will take a concept and respin it in their own words and just whatever. But I was going to ask you that, like, how does retention work with speed reading? Because that to me, if I was just whipping through it, I wouldn't pick it up as much as if I were to take my time and take notes and this and that. But I like that, how you slow it down for new topics. And then
I was going to say, I barely am able to retain anything I'm reading now as is. And now I'm highlighting and circling and all kinds of stuff. And I still can barely retain stuff. But the idea, it sounds a little bit like maybe what you're doing on the Kindle, is there's this Google Chrome add-on called the Spritzlet. And this Spritz will do the same thing. You set your word count and all that stuff, and you can read through stuff. And, it does work surprisingly well. Like, I'm surprised how much I can actually read and gather from it as quickly as it's going. Yeah. So it's pretty cool. I think that's a very cool little life hack to talk about.
Yeah, Jim Quick's a brilliant guy, though. I'm actually going to take one of his courses. He's got one on memorization.
I've taken it. It's amazing. Yeah, it's if you apply the principles and I had a teacher in high school that taught me a system called body files and how you can store different things. Like, I was learning a language, and in the language I was able to store in my hand. And so if I was trying to recall a word, I think of that hand and it helps my brain do this. But Jim Quick's program is amazing. So I would highly recommend doing it if you can. So, and his book, Limitless, is pretty good too. I was going to
say, we got to get this guy on as like an affiliate or something. We're going to keep plugging.
I've reached out. I got crickets back, but we're going to make it happen.
That's all right. We'll just keep beating on it. We'll send him enough business he can't deny. So I wonder then, so just getting back to business, can we talk a little bit about like the one thing that businesses should be doing that they aren't right now? Like, obviously life is tough, times are tough, finances and resources are tough. Everything is tough right now, at least for the lion's share of us. And so, what are the sorts of things, that we should be doing right now that we're not, that are, maybe opportunities missed?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the first thing they should consider, and we touched on this before, is really their cash position. They should be prioritizing their profitability, making sure their cash flow is coming in. We already hit on that, so I'll give you a second option. The next thing they should really be thinking about is their strategy and their plan, because that now is the time to really be considering what they need to do. And I hate the word, but in the new normal, right? So do they have to, so if you look at my framework, for instance, the markets, do you want to serve the same markets? Do you want to go down market or up market or a completely new market? Your products and services. Maybe you want to have a lower cost version, a higher cost version. It might be different, depending if you're doing well or not. Your value proposition. You better have a higher value proposition now than you did months ago, because people are less likely to move forward in many cases. Your new products. Is there a new way to get new buyers through new products? Your loyalty. So all these things come into play, and so now's a good time to really evaluate what's working and what's not working. Almost like we talked about before with failure. Maybe things aren't working, but don't put your head in the sand and pretend the problem's going to go away. This could last a while, so you have to change what you're doing if necessary.
So when you figure out where you want to go and why you want to be there, how do you define the action items to get there? Is there a process you go through with other businesses when you're coaching them?
Yes.
Can you break that step down for us a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So it comes down to so the first step is what we talked about, the what, which is your strategy. So you might want to try a different strategy. My favorite strategy is growth compounding, which we just talked about. The next step is really your planning. And so if you look at, I'll give you a story. So back in the 1960s, of course, there was the mission to the moon, right? We wanted to get to the moon. United States was trying to get there. The Soviets were well ahead. And so what happened? Well, Kennedy comes along and he had a vision. And he said, we're going to get a man to the moon by the end of this decade. So it's very specific, by the end of the decade. So I had a timeline and they had a goal. And so that's the start of any plan. You have to start with what your vision is, which is the what, right? But then break it down to when do you want to get there and what's the goal? Like, what's the specific goal and when is it going to be accomplished? That way, you hit it. And then from there, your brain, once you have that, your brain automatically starts working out the solution, no matter what it is, whether it's weight loss or planning or business. But from a business perspective, it really comes down to the factors we talked about. Which markets are you going to serve? What products are they going to get? How are you going to get new buyers? And really, it's a function of different campaigns. So if you are trying to get new buyers, you want to do campaigns that attract people. If you're trying to get more growth out of your existing client base, you want to improve the lifetime value or maybe get more referrals from them. So it really is a case-by-case basis. But the first goal is to say, okay, what do I want to accomplish? And then you break it down into small steps. Again, it's the same theme. You got to break it down to exactly how you're going to get there.
Is that what this results loop is behind you?
Absolutely. This is my friend. Yeah. And so there's a template. Anyone can download it from the website for free. But this is exactly how we do it. We break it down step by step so that at the end, you know exactly what steps you need to take. And I even have, if you go to results score, you can actually score yourself on the 6 factors and see exactly what you should start on first. So you can get a score of 1 to 100%. The lowest score is probably a good place to start with your own growth.
I like that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's awesome. I wonder, so we talked earlier about sort of the indicators of success, but can we talk, sort of flip the script a little bit and talk about the indicators of a problem? So can we talk a little bit about sort of the red flags that we might observe in our business or in businesses we're modeling to sort of, I guess, identify the problems coming down the road? I think for so many of us, it's one of those, see the forest from the trees kind of things,
right? Where
we just kind of can't see the things that are going on around us because we're focused or we're working through problems or whatever it is. So I wonder if you could talk about some of these, these sort of indicators or these red flags, things we should be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. I was fortunate to work in the acquisition space, doing a $400 million acquisition. And, I can tell you from an acquisition standpoint, one of the big things that, acquirers will look at, private equity firms, et cetera, is your retention rate. So probably the first thing you want to look at is what percentage of your client base is what they call churning out or leaving you. So ideally, the best businesses are always built on a subscription or a recurring revenue model, because that makes your business growth much easier. You get a client and they pay you consistently month over month. So that's kind of one of the basic principles I always teach about growing a business. But then within that, even if you don't have that, one of the first things I look at is your retention rate. There's a number of things you can look at, both the causes of the, poor retention rate and kind of the signals of it. So for instance, one score is the Net Promoter Score or NPS. That gives you an idea if your clients would buy from you again, recommend you to a friend, et cetera. And so that's a great place to start. And then also, going back to the cash position, are people paying you on time? Are they delayed? And then what probably the most critical metric you should know in your business is the ratio between your cost per acquisition and the lifetime value. So the cost it takes to get a new customer should be significantly lower than what is their lifetime value. So if I have a customer and they give me $1,000 a month, that's $12,000. Say on average they stay 3 years, that's $36,000 of lifetime value. I want to make sure my acquisition cost is well below that, which hopefully it is. If your agency costs $36,000, that's a big problem. But that's one of the things you want to look at. But this goes back to your business model. So if I had a client once that was selling like dog collars. They're $50 dog collars, and which was a high price for a dog collar, and the math was very hard to work. So I was always working with them to try to write that. But for smaller, agency, it's easy, right? Because there's always a high lifetime value. More problematic when you're doing e-commerce, which is really why you want to think about how do I get recurrence, referrals, and other systems to get people back again and again and increase that lifetime value. But that's always the key ratio: lifetime value to cost per acquisition.
That.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you.
If you watch Shark Tank, they're always asking that question. Like if you listen to it now, you're going to notice that, that's what they ask it every single time.
Yeah. You used to run an agency called Big Fish Results.
Yes.
This might be a personal question, and if it is, we'll skip by it.
Yeah.
Did you close that down, or did it get acquired? Why did you stop?
It's still viable. It's still viable.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So the way I think about it is in 3 tiers. We do it, you do it, or we help. And so more of the white glove service is with my agency, where we'll do the campaigns for you. Not as much of an emphasis, to be honest, because I'm more focused on the training consulting. The training is you do it yourself, so you can take courses on all the stuff that I know, literally giving you everything I've learned over 25 years of doing this stuff. And then in the middle of that is we help, which is where the coaching comes into play.
Oh, okay. I was under the impression that you closed it, shuttered, and rebranded to another name.
No, it's still there.
Okay. How did you get into coaching, and how long have you been doing that, and do you enjoy it?
Yeah, that's newer. I've only started that. I started pivoting, I won't say pivoting, but focusing more on the training consulting roughly 2 years ago.
Okay.
And the start was with building this framework, which literally took me like 8 years to build. Like I started building this like when I started my agency, and it took me a heck of a lot longer than I thought it would. But that's when I started in that area. And the reason why is actually came from the agency. So I'd work with a bunch of clients, and I'd realize they aren't marketing ready. Like they have no idea who they're targeting, what their value proposition is, and they want to add fuel to the fire when there's no fire, And so an agency is better when you're going to, grow a company and scale it. And once you have everything figured out, if you're trying to figure out your business model, your profitability, then you're not anywhere near ready for an agency. So I identified that gap. I said, okay, for the average small business, what do they need? And that's why I created this framework that's easy to understand and simple to execute.
Can you run us through what's the word? Just a example business with that model, like just some sort of, how it would work with a bread company. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the first question would be, what's your market? So is it a local bakery? Is it a national bakery? And in terms of the market, let me go back to this. Most people don't understand what marketing is. So when you say marketing, most people think it's branding or they think it's advertising.
Sure.
When in reality, even when I was in college, they teach you the 4 Ps: product, price, place, promotion.
Yeah.
So all that intertwines, not to mention clearly like the ancestors of marketing, like Philip Coulter, he talks about serving a market at a profit. So even the earliest definitions of marketing talked about profit. For some reason, that's totally got wiped away. And so the market is, getting back to the framework, the market ties into everything, because if you're targeting a high-end market, you better have high-end pricing. Imagine if you bought a Ferrari for, $20,000. Be very sketchy. You would think there's something wrong with it. And so the first step is to look at the market. So for the bread company, let's just say I'm going to go higher end because of all the problems we talked about before with lifetime values. So maybe my average loaf is, I haven't bought bread in a while, to be honest. My wife usually buys it, but I don't know, $10. Say it's a $10 loaf of bread. Then I want to look at the products and services I'm going to have. So is there different variations of the bread? Maybe a French bread, Italian loaf, rolls. So there's different ways of packaging it. And a lot of times the smaller packaging can make more money. So say instead of doing one giant loaf of bread that weighs a pound, I do, dinner rolls. The cost for each of the dinner rolls may actually be higher. The profit on each dinner roll could be higher. So taking into account a lot of those, the math involved, which, people don't like the math, but that's the fundamental part of the business. That's how you keep score. So looking at that, and then your value proposition. The value proposition answers the question, why would I buy from you as opposed to anyone else or do nothing? So people have alternatives. They could go to Panera Bread. They could bake the bread themselves. They could go to the grocery store. So why would they buy from you as opposed to anyone else? Do you have something proprietary about it? Do you stuff it with, spinach or something, something different that makes it unique? That's the fundamental question you have to answer, because everything else breaks if your value proposition isn't there. And the value is really the bridge between where someone is today and where they want to be. So the distance, the bigger the distance, the more valuable it is. And so I remember I think it was a pizza company or something like that. And I read it in a book somewhere. I think it was in Philadelphia. Oh no, I know it was. They were selling what are they called? The steak sandwiches. They're very popular.
The Phillies
cheesesteaks. They differentiated themselves by doing like a $200 cheesesteak. And what did they do? Well, they had the truffle oil, and so all of a sudden they elevated it. At that point, then you're not playing the same game. They're not buying the sandwich. They're buying, the experience. They're buying status. And so anytime you can change, again, the why. What's their why? Their why may not be to buy bread. It might be to impress their friend or post it to Instagram and say what they did. So all of a sudden you're raising your value exponentially. So that's the value proposition.
The bottle service at a club is what I thought of just instantly right there.
Bottle service, exactly. Yeah, and then as you go around the loop, you look at the number of buyers. How do you get more buyers in, right? So which goes into your distribution? Is it going to be a grocery store? Is it going to be, on a stand on the side of the road? All these things come into play. So, and how are you going to attract them? Why would they come? Do you have an offer? Your offer, in my experience, the biggest drivers of new buyers is your offer, number one, your audience, your offer, and your messaging. Those three things align to drive the purchases. Then you want to look at, okay, how to increase the size. So in my training, my sales team, I actually work with I kid you not, since we're in the baking stories, I train a Girl Scout troop on how to sell, because my daughter is a Girl Scout, on how to sell more cookies based on my framework. And one of the things I taught them, say, okay, when they buy their cookies, what you want to do is offer the most popular brands first, Thin Mints and Samoans. And that's automatically going to make someone more likely to buy. So that's their offer. And then what you want to do is bundle the least popular one, the lemon, whatever it is. And they increase their buyers tremendously. And so you want to look at that. How do I increase the lifetime value? So do I want to bundle 3 loaves of bread together? Am I going to ask them, in the sales process, do you want one more? That kind of thing, which is McDonald's is great at that, right? They're known for supersizing, right? Do you want fries with that, right? And then as you go around the loop to the final part, loyalty. How do I ensure they come back? If they have Sunday dinner every Sunday and they need a loaf of bread, how do I remind them to come back to me? How do I have a loyalty program? And how do I make the bread so fantastic that they want to refer me to their friends and family? So that's the loop, an example for a bakery.
Yeah, I love that. So will you, just circling back to the beginning here in these last few minutes, I want to take just one more extra second on this growth compounding idea. Yeah. So now that we've done this in-depth study of it, right, with our little fictitious bread company, which I think is wildly useful, I wanted to talk about, so now the growth compounding is these 6 categories working together with one another. Can you talk a little bit about how that part works? And just, I guess, help me see the interactivity between the two the things a little better.
Sure. Just to keep it simple, I'll use the last 3 factors of the loop. And let's just say a person comes in. If they come in and buy a bread, right? That's and they grow, and say you get 10% more buyers today than you did a year ago. That's 10% growth. If they then go and buy, if you increase their sale, right? So if you get that one person to buy just one extra loaf using the sales process I just told you, you instantly doubled that, right? For that same buyer. Now imagine if you had doubled your size of your number of buyers, right? So instead of growing at 10%, you grew you doubled, right? It would be a compound effect. So in other words, each incremental growth you do around the curve, if you grow by 10%, you're growing by, if you do 3 factors, you're going to grow by 33%. So it's exponential growth. It's not 10% each because they're doing each step. So say I'm the buyer. If I grow by 10%, that's a 10% growth. If I then buy one more thing, or on average 10% more, right? Just a 10% upcharge, I'm going to grow by what, 23%? And then if I then refer just one person, 10% of the time, I'm going to grow by 33%. Most businesses just focus on one factor, they're just going to grow by 10%. But if you just take the example of a person walking through that and saying, hey, can I get this person to buy 10% more? Can I get them to refer just 10% more? Can I get them to come back just 10% more? You can see kind of the compounding effect.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, and you mentioned, just now that, most companies just will choose a factor or any one factor. I mean, is the purpose of this loop to use it, like grow everything consistently at the same time? So for example, we're working on all 6 buckets, or should we, I mean, you mentioned earlier your sort of test, where you can kind of put in your characteristics or whatever, and it'll sort of bake out for you where you're weakest. I mean, should we be focusing on one channel or another, or how do we sort of, I guess, address the interactivity of these 6 items if, say, we have, limited resources or something, and we don't have the ability or the manpower to really grow in all 6 verticals at a time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you always want to prioritize. And a lot of times I use the 10% and the multiple factors to kind of expand upon the point that there's so much opportunity. But in reality, you can make tremendous growth just in one area. And the reason why is because most businesses, in my experience, they focus on just one factor. And that factor is getting new blood. They're always trying to get new buyers. When the real opportunity and the easiest thing to execute, because it doesn't really take any resources, is increasing your loyalty and increasing the lifetime value of your buyers. And there's so many ways to do it. You could literally just increase I talked to a chiropractor and I asked him, I said, when was the last time you raised your prices? He says, oh, it's been like 10 years. I mean, you want to grow by 10%, increase your price by 10%. I mean, that's what I'm saying. So it doesn't have to be more work. And so in my experience, if you're a startup, you want to go around the loop in order. If you're an established company, you're actually better off working backwards. So you want to start with your loyalty and your referral systems first, and then go to lifetime value. And so there's growth for every kind of business, but a lot of times it's not more work. That's the crazy part of it. It's just things that people don't think about.
Well, and the loyalty and the referral system is actually going to drive new business anyways, because the referrals are actually really easy, because if they're loyalty already and they're coming back, all you have to do is ask, do you know someone that might need the same service? And 90% of the time they do. Absolutely.
Yeah, and the key is having value goes across all these areas. So the key is always to make sure you're exceeding the value, because that's what really is going to drive the referrals and the loyalty in particular.
I like that.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Well, I had one more question. It feels a little out of left field, so I don't know, but we'll go ahead and ask it anyway. Yeah. I wanted to talk to you just quickly about when to train versus when to hire. So, obviously, especially now when resources are limited, if we don't have to hire, we probably don't want to. Yeah. And so I wonder if you talk a little bit about that. Like, what are the characteristics in our employees that we should be just cultivating versus the ones that we're buying?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's actually a matrix I created to answer that question. But really, the key factors is there core competency? Is it something you have in-house? Is it something that's used frequently? Or for instance, so say I don't know anything about web design and I need it once every 3 years. That's pretty much a no-brainer to outsource that. So you want to look at what capabilities you have within your organization and what's the key strategic importance. If it's low importance, and low capacity, like ability to do it in-house, you definitely want to outsource that. If it's something that you're very skilled at and that you have capabilities and it's something that's going to be recurring, then you want to make sure you bring that in-house. That's kind of the simple answer, but there's a blog post I'm going to have out on that kind of explains that in detail.
Cool.
Nice.
I love that. Well, hey, so sort of here in closing, where can people learn more about you, about your results loop and everything else? And then also, how can people just get in touch if they're looking to do so?
Yeah, absolutely. So the manifesto, which takes some of the best parts of my book, that's available at smallstepsmanifesto.com. And then if anyone wants to take the results score, it's resultsscore.com. How creative is that? And then if anyone has a question, you can email me at tony@meettonyg.com. I'll be happy to answer any questions I wasn't able to handle today or answer.
Great.
Today.
Well, that sounds awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tony. It's been an awesome conversation. Really grateful for your time and breaking some of that down. I think it's really good advice.
Yeah, this was really fun. I appreciate it. And look forward to hearing it.
All right, cool. Well, so thanks to everybody who tuned in this week and every week and for joining our guests, Tony and me and Mike. And we'll see you all next time.
Awesome. Thank you.